Welcome to the newest episode of my complete Factorio tutorial series. Today I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about fluid handling. In this video I will talk a lot about different methods of transporting fluids, and in the end we will take a look at how to optimize your oil refinery setup. Fluids are generated by different buildings like offshore pumps or oil refineries. Oil refineries and other buildings also require fluids to operate. You can see this when looking at the set recipe or at the building while being in alt mode. Now it's our job to connect the correct outputs and inputs together. The easiest way to do this is to just use some pipes. This is great if you don't have to go very far. Just remember that each pipe you lay down can only carry one fluid. If you need to transport multiple fluids, then you have to leave one tile of space between both pipes, because otherwise they would try to connect together and that doesn't work. If you need to go further, then underground pipes are easier to use. They work similarly to underground belts, but they can go further underground. If you need to cross two pipes, then you will also need to use them. Storing fluids is also possible. You just have to add a tank to your pipeline. One tank can store up to 25,000 fluid units, while one pipe can only store about 100. Using one or two tanks is fine in most scenarios, but please don't add too many tanks, as this helps in no way. If you don't produce enough, then tanks can't change that. Too many tanks just cause lag and will be difficult to work with. Pumps can be used for different purposes, the most obvious being accelerating and compressing fluids. Adding pumps to tanks like this will help with increasing the throughput of your pipes. Pumps also allow fluids to only flow one way, so you can direct the fluid flow with them. The circuit network can be used to control pumps based on certain factors, usually the fill level of tanks, but more on that later. Now let's talk about flow. The maximum throughput of pipes gets defined by their flow rate. Fluids in one system always try to be equal in all parts of the system. This equalizing is happening at the speed of the flow rate. Pumps can be used to increase the flow rate. Long pipelines without pumps will only have poor throughput. This means that fluids won't reach the other end at a decent speed. If you put a pump at the end or beginning, or both, this speed will be increased. If you go over a very long distance, or if you need lots of throughput, you might have to add more pumps throughout the pipeline. Adding multiple pumps behind each other doesn't really help. You can also just lay multiple pipes as well. If you need to go really far, pipes aren't always the best option, but luckily there are two more ways to transport fluids. You can convert your fluid into items, for example. This is done by assembling machines that have a fitting barreling recipe set. Now they take in fluids and empty barrels and will output filled barrels with that fluid. These barrels can be transported like normal items using belts or robots and inserters. Before use, they will have to be converted back into fluid, which can be done the same way, just with a different recipe. If the fluid inputs or outputs of your assembly machine are the wrong way, you can rotate them easily. You could also load these barrels onto trains now, but there is a better way. Instead of using normal cargo wagons, you could also use fluid wagons. They can not only carry a little bit more fluid, but they can also be loaded faster if you use tanks directly connected to pumps in a setup like this. One fluid wagon can carry the same amount of fluid like a normal fluid tank. Now let's talk about oil refining, as this is something many beginners struggle with. An important thing to always keep in mind while building your oil stuff is to keep everything expandable, so you can easily increase the production of all oil products. After you placed a few pump jacks onto some oil spills, you have to bring that crude oil into some refineries. One or two should be fine in the beginning. If you build your outputs like this, then you can easily add more refineries in the future. As soon as you unlock advanced oil processing, you should start to use this recipe in your refineries. This will give you more of the oil products you will actually need, but it also requires water. Now we can use the same principle on the inputs. Now you have petroleum, light oil and heavy oil. You will probably mostly need petroleum to make some plastic in the beginning, so we will have to do something with light and heavy oil. The refineries will only work if the outputs are in full. Adding one or two tanks for them will be sufficient at the beginning. You should use your light and heavy oil to make some solid fuel, which is required for the chemical science production. Solid fuel is like coal, just better. Once you unlocked oil cracking, then we can use that to break up heavy oil into light oil and light oil into petroleum. But you will also need a little bit of heavy oil and light oil. Perfectly ratioing this out is impossible, so we are screwed, right? Well, no. We can use something that I already briefly talked about, and that is the circuit network. This will help us to regulate our cracking process. We only want to crack heavy oil into light oil once our heavy oil tanks are almost full, so we still have enough buffer. But we are also not completely full, so our refining can still work uninterrupted. To achieve this, you only have to connect some red or green wire to your heavy oil tanks and then onto a pump that sits between the tanks and the cracking like this. Now the pump can read the contents of our tanks and we can set the enabled condition based on that. In this case, we say if heavy oil is greater than 40,000, we turn on the pump. I'm measuring 2 tanks, so 40,000 heavy oil means that on average every tank is filled up to 20,000 units, which is almost full. You can experiment around with these numbers a little and then perfect that setup so it works best for you. Then you can also do the same thing for light oil to petroleum gas cracking. Now we have a pretty decent oil setup for early game that is able to get expanded in the future once you need more oil production. That was already everything I have to tell you about this topic. If you still have questions, then feel free to ask them in the comments down below. If you learned something new, please leave a like and also subscribe so you don't miss any new videos and tutorials. Feedback is also always appreciated. Have a great time. See you all next time.